and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network, where we reflect on Wildbow's most popular and recreational work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we are back to wrap up false moves and get into summer break. Time to kick back and relax, Elliot.
Finally, vacation time is here. It's going to be a nice chill arc.
Yeah,
everyone's just going to have fun with it. You know,
relaxing.
we got the bad muscle stuff out of the way, and 12.z 13 is just going to be smooth sailing.
The muscles are gone. Some of the witch hunters are dead. Easy peasy.
It's all looking up.
Yeah, things are looking up this summer. I guess we should mention the fan art contest voting is still open. Is that correct? When does that ends like pretty soon, doesn't it?
Yeah, if we get this episode out on time, you'll have about just over 12 hours to jump on Patreon, sign up, and then get your vote in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to show all four of these off in the.
They're
in the
very
post.
Wonderful, aren't they?
I've seen one or two of them pop up on the subreddit already, and all of them are they're so good every time you see them.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other housekeeping before we get into the chapters?
I did just want to quickly shout out the Pact audiobook.
Yes.
For those of you who have not yet started Pact and are not keeping up with Malia and Jenny, you've got no excuses now, because the Pact audiobook is essentially finished. It's all recorded, and Speedchuck's just releasing an episode a day for the next month and a half. I think it's got he's got about 50 chapters left to release, but they're all there scheduled. So by the time you catch up, it'll be finished. So there's no excuse anymore.
Yeah. And with that, shall we get into it? Let's get into it.
Sure.
False moves 12Z. We are in Reed Muss's head, and what a fun head to be in it is. Reed gives us the lay of the land in the Musser cabin as he prepares to go for a nice recreational walk with his only friend, Y, and Raquel, who tags along.
Yeah, well, I mean, Y basically gets her to tag along, and I'm headcanoning that it's because Y doesn't want to have to talk to Reed alone. He wanted a buffer.
And I think the universe knows that Raquel's place is just the perpetual third wheel. So, that's always the role she's got to play.
Yeah, but obviously, this chapter, in a way, it just sucks to read.
Oh yeah,
because it's well
harsh.
Written. Yeah, it's designed to disgust and anger you, and it does.
Yep, it achieves its goal perfectly.
Yeah, we're doing this a bit weird because we actually recorded our Arc 12 reflecting episode earlier today with the special guest for that. So I feel like I'm going to start repeating stuff I already said in that, but it's a really great bookend for the arc that started with 12.1, which also had a super frustrating chapter.
Yeah.
That said, though, I love Reed as a choice for the interlude character because he's super central. Through him we get insights on everyone else in Team Musser because he's really in the middle of them all.
Yeah.
But he was also someone we knew very little about, so it gave Wildbow a lot more freedom to tell Reed's story in the interlude as well. It's great. It taught us everything about all the other characters, but also he was a great character to focus on because he was essentially the blankest slate for Wildbow to work with.
Yeah, I mean, of the practitioners in town, we have Y, who's kind of the representation of Alexander's influence here. We have Abraham, who is that, as well as also just the obstacle that is kind of they're not going to talk their way out of. And then we have Raquel, who's taking this position as potentially, her mind could be changed or is at least a ideological opponent for the Kenneteers. And Reed was kind of in between Abraham and Raquel in that and didn't quite fit. And this is just oh my God, what a great place for his character to be. And I'm sure Wildbow planned this out perfectly because it is just so perfect that Reed didn't quite fit there. And so we get him as the interlude and it just is so fascinating and interesting and horrifying.
And because if it was Wise, we get a bit dragged out of this conflict and the Musser situation. Really the combatants here that we need to learn about are the Mussers, and Wise point of view would distract from that. And then also, like, to be in Abraham's head almost would have been too much. Like, I'm thinking
Yeah.
of George R. R. Martin has a rule for the A Song of Ice and Fire books where you never get a POV from someone who is a king because
Mm.
like he wants it's the characters around the king who are affected by their decisions and how they're acting who are the people whose stories he really sort of wants to tell. And it's
Yeah.
I almost get like that sort of vibe as well. Like with Abraham, we know he's not going to get defeated right now. You need to leave a bit of mystery there. Seeing inside his head would almost tell us too much as we head into the conflict. It's so much cooler to get like
Yeah.
the mini me version of him or the him in training. So we
Yeah,
get a
the
bit,
the
but not
reflection of him,
direct.
right? And so
Yeah,
that when he gets his time in the sun, we really get into his head, whether it's his interlude or not. I'm sure we will get to explore Abraham at that time.
yeah. Oh, I think Reed's POV really gives us everything we need to know about Abraham. But it's really fun to get it in this indirect way of also he's like even worse than Reed. Okay,
Yeah,
okay, yep. Still
yeah,
leaves a bit to the imagination.
yeah. As an example, the very first paragraph in this interlude is setting up the sleeping arrangements in this cabin, and the upstairs good bedrooms are for Abraham and his others,
Yeah.
and Reed, his son is relegated to the bad downstairs bedrooms with the others. And it's just like, I just found that really funny as, like, obviously, as a perfect lead into how we are learning about Reed as a reflection of Abraham and all this stuff. Yeah, I just think it's hilarious that Abraham treats Reed as maybe worse than his others that are like bound to him. I don't know. I just thought that was a great way to start us off with the themes of this chapter.
Yeah, God, I don't even know what term I want to use for it. Like double standards, inconsistency, whatever. There's like this thing in the Musa family of like this strict hierarchy that gets messy because a Musa is above an other. Like
Mm,
that's something we're going to hit a lot. But then, yeah, you're right. Like because these others are connected to Musa, and he gets feeling like feedback of how they're feeling from them. He also gives them nice rooms, but it's like a selfish thing that he's doing. And then yeah, it relegates Reed to being below them, which sends this message of like the others are below me and you are below them. Like
yeah, it's so
everything's a fucking
fascinating.
hierarchy with these people. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean to just start diving into like Reed as
let's
a
do it.
character. I mean he's obviously we already said it. This chapter kind of sets out to make you hate the guy. It's
Yeah,
very good at doing that. He comes across as kind of the worst, but I also still like kept sort of forcing myself to remember that like it's a little unfair to hold this against him because like he was brought up in this environment, and this is sort of the argument Avery was having in last week's chapters, I guess. But like I find it interesting to try to think about like where that line is for people. Like when does someone cross the threshold of like because like Abraham, you could probably argue Abraham was raised in this environment too. So should he be held responsible?
mm,
Like I think more people agree that Raquel is kind of someone who's been raised by this, and it isn't fair to punish her for being raised by them at 13. But it's like presumably Reed and Abraham, the same rule applies. So it's like, at what point does somebody reach the point where it's like, no, okay, like you don't get the benefit of you were raised in this environment as an excuse anymore?
I mean, realistically, I think the answer is when the amount of damage that they are doing slash can do becomes too untenable, right? Like Raquel isn't powerful enough. If Raquel was 100 times as powerful as she was and nothing else had changed, I think people would be less likely to give her a chance because she has the potential to do so much actual damage.
Yeah, also I suppose, but then in that case, I'd argue we're not really talking about saying Abraham is a bad person. It's more just like he needs to be stopped because he has the power to be doing bad stuff.
Yes. Yes.
But then, like in theory, if Abraham got weakened like Reed does towards the end of this chapter, I guess yeah, then like would you move on to some sort of rehabilitory stuff and not want to punish him anymore?
I mean, I probably would, but depends on the people that he's hurt, I suppose, and what they would think.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I tend to like I guess force myself to always favor rehabilitory stuff. I wasn't really raised in an environment where that was the default. I'm trying to like teach myself to be like that
Mm.
because I think it's better. But yeah, it's
But
definitely
it is a
hard. Like
privilege to be rehabilitated, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, okay, so yeah, to just get back to bashing on Reed, and Abraham, really, I
That's
suppose,
what
because
this whole chapter's gonna be.
um, like we've got to talk about Reed's thoughts on women and others. I don't know
Yeah.
what order you want to tackle these in.
I
They're
mean,
both super gross.
yeah, he doesn't think of either too highly, does he?
No, I mean, Raquel in particular
Hmm.
is the recipient of thoughts that just really hammer home how much Reed thinks of women as like essentially as a product. I want to say there's this super messed up stuff where he it's clear that like in his head he genuinely cares about Raquel. Like he's frustrated because he wants her to do well. It's just in his perspective, it's like her doing well for him is essentially trying to sell herself another practitioner. Like I don't think it's a mistake at all that his first thought for who she should be friends with was Fernanda, because Fernanda is someone who kind of was trying to embrace slash weaponize that aspect of how women are treated in this world. Like Reed sees women as having to, yeah, I guess, try to marry a man
Mm.
essentially, and it's just like it leads to this super frustrating like series of comments he makes about her body and stuff. And the most frustrating thing about it to me is I was like, fuck, I see how in his head this is him genuinely caring and helping her, and that's
Yeah, I mean,
worse.
often his train of thought in this chapter goes along the lines of like trying to help her and then thinking of something genuinely horrific and him just not kind of, well, I mean, because that's, I guess, the help that he saw himself getting, or yeah, thought that he needed or something, and it's yeah, it's horrifying.
Yeah, and it's reinforced by like all these details we keep learning, like about how Raquel's mother, his aunt, was disappeared in some way. We don't get the
Yeah,
specifics. I don't
yeah,
really want them, but
yeah,
if you really fail in this family, they will, yeah, like disappear you.
yeah,
And so, like, that's sort of adding this pressure on Reed for what to want Raquel to do well because he doesn't want her to get disappeared. Like, it's coming from a good place, just inside the worst place.
mm,
Like I hate it, but also
yeah.
it's very compelling in a sort of like story way, like very challenging. Yeah.
God, yeah, it's yeah. The vibe of this family is just so fucked up, and getting to see that firsthand through Reed is, I mean, I guess it's good from an information perspective, but yeah, horrifying.
Yeah, and like the we've spent this whole story learning to respect and value others, and that it's just the opposite in this family. Like the next sort of topic to talk about with Reed is just the way he unashamedly thinks of others as lesser.
Yeah,
Um, there's just all this stuff like the way he talks to and treats Blackhorn and Drown, the
yeah,
way he like he lists his travels and where he's been, and there's just like the mention of his familiars is basically, oh yeah, this is where I picked up Blackhorn, which I can't imagine Avery being like, oh yeah, and then I went to the Forest Ribbon Trail, grabbed a snowdrop.
that's right. Picked up Snowdrop. Yeah,
Yeah, like it's just yeah. I think the first other we see in this chapter is the icon Nova Aquila or something,
yeah,
and I mean, it's not a very subtle metaphor. She's literally like this icon that's designed to be just like a beautiful woman, and it's like yes, it's very much in my father's image to just have a pretty woman around looking like she's doing things,
mm,
like just like what a perfect merger of the shitty way this family treats women and others by combining the two concepts and just opening with this like oh
yeah. It's not great. um, yeah, the the vibe of the others in this is so interesting, and the way that we see them through Reed's perspective, like uh, uh, when he first considers Drown in this chapter, the backstory to Drown is, a clearly a kind human being who was physically unattractive and so was like relegated to the outskirts of society, found and fell in love with a woman who fell in love with him in return, and the fact that he was an outsider to this group who had earned the heart of somebody that other people desired made him a villain to them, and so they attacked him, right?
yep
But when Reed considers Drown, he thinks of him as an ugly fisherman. Like that's the description of him. Which is just the exact way that these other small-minded people thought of and attacked him for. And it's just like, unironically, Reed thinks of Drown in the same way as the clear villains in Drown's story did. And it's just so, like, unironically hilarious the way that
Yeah.
Reed is so oblivious to his own train of thought.
I mean, there's gonna be we're probably not even gonna touch on all of them. There are so many moments like that in this
Yeah,
chapter where like Reed will say something, and it's just like you just have to pause after reading it, and be like, "Are you fucking serious, dude? Like, do you
yeah,
not see what you just said?" Like,
yes. There's some very
um,
good ones.
yeah, this chapter's for them because you're right. I mean, there's a couple of other things we'll touch on, but like so much of what happens with Drown and Reed reflects other stuff that they talk about in their past. Like, yeah, he would Drown. It's just like Reed is clearly sitting in the role of the villains in his story, and we'll see Drown flip that on its head towards the end of the chapter. But like the other awful part about like this is like Drown's backstory is also just fucking like cool in that like other way of being super interesting, and like Nova as well, like the idea of this icon that a god just like breathed life into, and they can do all this cool shit, and she just wants to go around learning about like pop culture and stuff. Like it's like it's really I found myself really conflicted reading them because half of me was like, whoa, this is so cool, and the other half was like, I can't believe that like this is the language Reed is using for them. This is where they are now. Like they've been enslaved and stolen. Like it was like I've found myself reading it and going like I can't let myself enjoy how cool these others are because their situation is so awful. Um,
Yeah,
like yeah,
yeah.
which is just like the power of this chapter in a nutshell. I think.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, they Reed and Y and Raquel go around on their walk, and Reed is basically recounting his backstory here to Y.
Yeah, and let's touch on why, because he's only really shown up in Borrowed Eyes, and he was in Nicolette's interlude for a bit. I just remember him popping up because I remember he had a girlfriend in that,
Yep.
and I guess the thing you have to sort of do with Y is sort of compare him to Alexander, and little details like how he behaved in Borrowed Eyes and the fact that he has a girlfriend as opposed to Alexander and stuff. Just I guess I came into this chapter with this vibe of Y as somebody who is quite similar to Alexander and potentially trying to follow that path, but as a person is less like toxically ambitious. Like, you know how we saw from early Alexander, he's just always been like that. He was always going to end up where he ended up. Whereas Y feels like somebody who is making a choice. And I guess Miss touches on this, but like in this chapter, I really found that opinion reinforced for me. Like, just Y is definitely leading into the big time Alexander vibes of just like he gives away nothing. He says basically nothing and just gets Reed to tell him his entire fucking life story.
Yeah, he. It's interesting. You definitely get this vibe that like Reed. I mean, Reed explicitly thinks that Y is the only person that he can really think of as a friend, and Y kind of says the same thing in return. But I just found it so interesting. Like you could feel that Y could be a really good manipulator if he wants to, and I don't think he is, but he could just genuinely be 100% manipulating Reed, and I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I think he is to some degree because, like, there's the bit where Miss basically says, "Oh, if you're here for Alexander, we can do X, Y, Z." And Y basically says, "I'm not here for Alexander," which confirms
Yeah,
that what he's here for is the Bellinger family needs the Musses as allies. He's here to ensure they can stay attached to the
yeah,
powerhouse family of the region, and that's like so that definitely skews your perspective on his friendship with Reed because yeah, he's basically as you said reads like Y is the person I trust the most in the world, and that is like no wonder Y is indulging this bullshit. He needs that. Like that is what he's here for. Y is here to make sure that Reed continues to, or he continues to be Reed's number one guy. Interesting to see how he goes based on how this chapter ends, because that's obviously not in the cards anymore. But
yeah, yeah,
yeah, I don't know. There are just like a lot of things with Y that give me hope for him. Like as I said, I feel like he's at this crossroads where he's either going to go and become an Alexander, or he has this ability to change the trajectory of the family to be a little bit more healthy. And there's all these little things that give me hope that that's somewhere he can go. Like, he never outright challenges Reed, but he often rephrases things Reed says when agreeing with him. Like, Reed will say something like, "Oh, Nicolette has gone astray," and Why will be like, "Yes, she has gone her own way." Like, he can't help but just slightly be a little bit more healthy about how he thinks about stuff.
Mm.
He's far from like ideal, but like he's within that realm where I maintain hope he can break good.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to tell. Like, yeah, I don't know. I really feel like he could go either way, and that's why it's very interesting.
Yeah, like he's going to be probably the most interesting one to track, maybe alongside Raquel, as just like somebody who I think, well, especially he's only here for the musses. Like,
Mm.
as if that starts to fade away, like if Abraham starts to not trust him, now that Reed's gone, that was his biggest thing. Like at a certain point, Y may either leave or flip.
Mm.
It's gonna be interesting to see how exactly that happens because it'll be the how that'll sort of decide how much I judge him for
Yeah,
it.
definitely. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I feel like I don't have a good read on exactly where he is, so we'll have to see where he ends up.
Yeah, my current read on him is he is somebody who is a more normal, caring, empathetic person than Alexander, but somebody who was brought up to idolize Alexander and is kind of just a bit like Reed, trying to blindly follow in Alexander's footsteps. And I think like Mist is starting to challenge that in this chapter for him, being like, is this really what you want?
Mm.
And I think that'll be an interesting question for Y to continue to ponder.
Yeah.
Uh, Back to shitting on the muscles, though. This whole thing, like, there's this bit where basically Reed sort of says to Raquel, like, the muscles aren't a family. Where cutting one person down elevates another. Father would take you coming after me with like a mark against both of us. And Raquel's like, I'm a musser, I know. And he's like, you're of the mussers, but you're not a musser.
Mm.
And like, obviously, there's the bullshit of this whole of the musser versus being a musser.
Being a musser. Yeah.
But like the hypocrisy of this whole statement is just ludicrous. Like he basically says, like he goes from "we are a family where cutting me down will hurt both of us," and she's like, "Yeah, yeah, I know," and he's like, "Oh, but you're not in the family." Like, it's just
Yeah. It's the it's so clearly just a set of arbitrary divisions that that have no real bearing in anything, right? Like,
well, yeah. His first statement is meaningless if she's not actually a musser. Like
yeah,
he's like the Mossers are a family where this, and then he's like, and then she says something. He's like, yeah, but you're not a Mosser. It's like, then why'd you say the first thing, idiot? Like, what are you talking about? And like, yeah, and he's like, this is a family where we don't cut one person down, but you're not in the family. You're less than me. You're shit. I'm cutting you down immediately after saying that that's a bad thing. Like, it's just, yeah, everything, everything about this family is such bullshit.
mm, yeah, yeah. It is. It's just bullshit.
And like he carries on. So much of this spiel he gives to Y about his backstory is like he went off and did this kind of crazy perverse version of Rum Springer. And like the reason he did well in it is that he went out to the world and never faltered from maintaining these like stupid Victorian era Musser values of like, only having sex when he gets the okay from his dad and
Mm,
stuff. And it just sort of really reinforced to me it's like this family is the worst part of the practice just distilled. Like Reed keeps talking about the weight. Like he's somebody who for every second of his life has felt the pressure that he has to behave this certain way and do these certain rules, and any slip up sends him back years and years. And it's just like that is like the rule of discourse for the practice, the thing where everyone has to tell the truth. It's like this. It's like if that concept invades every aspect of your life, like one small slip and he's gainsaid and it sets him back ages. If he loses one big battle, he's forsworn and loses the family. Like it's this toxic forsworn thing that's kicked off this whole fucking Carmine thing, the worst thing about the practice, and the muscles have turned it into everything about their lives.
mm. Yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, we're gonna say it a number of different times this chapter, I guess, but it's just so unhealthy.
Yeah,
Like,
and it makes them the perfect like end game foes as
yeah,
practitioners.
I mean, exactly, because they are just this ultimate expression of the practice, right? So of course, of course, it makes the perfect sense for them to be, the endgame boss, for Abraham to be the endgame boss. God, it's
Yeah,
so weird calling him Abraham and not Musa.
yeah, I know. I've been having to deprogram myself from just calling him Musa. Yeah, no, they've taken every toxic part of the practice and made it their whole thing, and it's worked for them, and that's the worst part. And it's yeah.
Mm,
Um, uh,
yeah.
I mean, the other aspect of this is like Reed absolutely reeks of this like cognitive dissonance of like I remember reading articles like a decade ago on like people who go to Ivy League colleges and then get jobs on Wall Street and talking about how they get like how they get offended by and don't like all this talk about like the 1% and how they have privilege because they'd all talk like I had to work really hard to get to this position, like how dare you say it's because of my privilege.
Mm,
And like Reed gives off the same vibes of like this thing where he's talking about how much weight he's had on his shoulders, how much he's had to do to get where he is, and sort of like feeling then that like he's worked for it and he's earned it. But then he constantly thinks about other people like Yadira and says, "Oh God, she couldn't be a Musa even if she had the chance." And it's like with that thought, you've just admitted that these other people don't get that chance. Like there's this cognitive dissonance of like knowing that other people don't have that chance, but also kind of refusing to let yourself acknowledge that because you did work hard for it. And so, like confronting the fact that if everyone else had the same ability to work that hard, you probably wouldn't have gotten it. Like he won't let himself consider that, so he just sort of lets these two facts sit in different parts of his head and doesn't let them intermingle.
mm, mm. Yeah. God, he's just so unaware, isn't he?
Yeah, and that's going to be the really interesting. Like, I wonder if he will appear in the story at all after the end of this chapter because
Yeah, I do find that question very interesting to think about because, yeah, well, one, he's a useful point of data for Raquel in her own journey to
God,
go either deeper into or further away from the family, and I think that will
yeah,
definitely be seen. But just Reed himself as a character, who knows what's going to happen to him next?
yeah, because like you'd hope at the end of this chapter he's in a position to self-reflect on everything, and
Yeah,
I hope that's what he does.
yeah. Um, this trio on their walk is interrupted by the arrival of Miss, who brings with her an offer.
Yes, and like I just want to read out Mrs. entrance because it's the greatest bit. This is a bit of a long quote, but basically Raquel's talking about how when she confronted Avery, Avery didn't seem to understand that the Kennedy is everything that's wrong with the practice,
Mm,
and Y responds, "Is there a world at large, a practice at large?" And Reed responds, "Is it there?" And Y's like, "I don't see it that way." And then they make fun of him for seeing things sort of meant to be his speciality. And Y responds, "The world is fluid. These systems naturally manifest and evolve. Sometimes we set down rules and laws. The powerful get to dictate it. Solomon got to dictate it." And then Miss just enters with the most baller entrance of all time of Solomon was forsworn in the end.
mm,
And like this is a crazy passage to read because I had to stop because there's so much in here. This might be one of the densest pieces of conversation in the story because it's like, first of all, again, more points for why, more hope for him that he does get it. Like, unlike Reed and Raquel, he sees that everything about the practice is a construct. It's only true as long as the people on top let it be true. Like, knowing that he can see that gives me hope that he will fall on the right side when the push comes to shove, hopefully. Like, he sees that it's malleable and can be better. Um, then the fact that it's not told to us that Miss is the one who said Solomon was forsworn in the end for like two
mm.
paragraphs, but like I feel
You
like
can
everyone
tell,
knows this
yeah,
the
immediately
second.
you know who it is, don't you?
Like Solomon was forsworn there. It's like there's only one person who's gonna bring that up and enter a conversation like that. And in fact,
Yeah.
like her entering the conversation with that line almost makes it easy to skip over the fact that she just dropped a fucking bombshell on us. Solomon was forsworn. Like that's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty wild to think about, isn't it? Like, it's a pretty clear mark that this entire system is just fucked.
Yeah, exactly. Like the fact that the guy who came up with it couldn't uphold it. Yeah, like it. I can't believe we're only learning this now. Like it's such a perfect detail to just invalidate these stupid parts of the system. Like yeah, the concept of forswearing. It's just
Mm.
yeah. I can't. Yeah. I just it's almost a blink and you'll miss it reveal. That's actually huge for our understanding of this entire world.
Mm.
The founding father couldn't even do it.
Yeah, it yeah, it's a pretty obvious marker that I mean, talking about all these like things to swear to and all that shit, it's a pretty obvious marker that they're flawed, right? I mean, if the musses are an extension of all the vows that practitioners have to make, and we see Reed as like aiming to be the golden boy in terms of swearing those vows. Obviously, it doesn't go very well by the end of this chapter for him. Like, the parallels to things like vows of chastity or whatever for traditional religious organizations are obviously there, and
Yeah.
those also never seem to go well.
No.
So yeah, I just think, yeah, it's a perfect, little note for Miss to drop in this chapter.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes me wonder, like, Reed talks about the fact that his dad didn't do the same sort of journeying and shit that he did. And it makes me wonder, like, I don't know what Abe's dad was like, but I wonder if Abe was held to these same standards that Reed is.
Yeah.
Um, I would not at all be surprised to learn that Abraham slipped up a lot more at this age than Reed did.
Yeah,
Um,
I really, I mean, I'm basically assuming that Abe is not as much of a golden boy as Reed seems to think he is, because
yeah,
it would just be impossible for him to be, right? Like, it's just not possible.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And yeah, and what perfect, what a more perfect way to sum that up than Solomon was forsworn. I can't get over just how perfectly that sums up how dumb this shit is.
Mm, yeah,
It's one of those details where I'm like, I'm almost mad none of us thought that might have happened before.
it's just so perfect, isn't it? It's too perfect. Like, if Miss could lie, I would be suspicious.
Yeah. Um,
Um,
but to touch on Mrs. Offer though,
mm,
the Kennett others clearly walked away from the conversation with Avery last week and really did their best to do as she wished, because this is a very generous offer.
it
The Kennett
really
others,
is. Raquel is not worth two experienced witch hunters.
yeah, and that's only like the initial offer. We start with this very generous offer of get Raquel out, and yeah, we'll take John and 2 witch hunters out, which is like just such a good deal for the Mosses. And they still say no, and so the Kennett others are still like, hey, listen, imitate Cherry Pop, like stick your arms up in the air and start running away, and we won't come after you. Like, it's a get out of jail free card, because we sort of see, uh, like by the time Raquel presumably uses it, like she's been, doing some pretty terrible shit for a long time. So it's just like,
Mm.
I'm very impressed by the Kennett others, how strongly they actually followed through and came up with what feels to me like as good a solution as you can get when somebody's as difficult to work with as the Mosses.
Yeah. 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 I think it's interesting that Y says not to take Mrs. Deal. This clearly good
Yeah,
deal. What do you make of that? Like, you obviously mentioned before that you think that Y being here is, him trying to tie the Belangers more tangibly to the Mosses, which means if they did take the deal, that would obviously stomp all over this plan a bit. I don't know. What do you think Y saw?
yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know.
Mm,
There is a chance, based on how we do see Abraham in this chapter, that Reed was right. There's no way they could take this sort of offer to him and he would accept it.
mm,
But yeah, maybe why might be here seeking a win. Like he might, why might sort of be aiming for, he needs, if the Mosses decide to leave or whatever, like the Kennett others want, then this sort of won't count as a win, and then Y's first job assisting them will sort of go down as one where they didn't really get a clean win.
mm,
And so maybe Y is very incentivized to help them get a win, because he needs to stay in their good books, and doing that involves helping them win. And yeah.
mm, mm. Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, Reed doesn't win in this chapter. So,
No, part of me, if you want to get really tinfoily, I sort of talked about how Y was the one who brought Raquel on and everything. Obviously, at the end of the chapter, Raquel has 2 directions she's going to be able to go. Right? You
mm,
mentioned it. she's either going to use Reed as a cautionary tale, or more depressingly and more likely, she's going to see this as her opportunity to step up and become his replacement. And Y may have made the calculated decision that he'd rather
be friends with Raquel. I do love that. That's a great theory.
I don't know how much credit we want to give him to be able to see stuff like that, but I mean, look, I'm not gonna lie. If I was in his position and I had the choice between working with Reed or working with Raquel, I know which one I'd pick. So yeah, the tinfoil opinion is that Y wanted this to go down.
Yeah.
Speaking, like you did before, of moments where Reed just completely misses the universe, showing him how shit he is. There's this great moment where Miss starts talking to Raquel, and Reed says, "Don't talk to her." And then the text just says, "There was a pause, as if both Miss and Raquel thought he was talking to them." And it's just, it's such a dark humor moment of just like, Reed, do you not see what that says about you?
Yeah, it's a really perfect moment, isn't it?
And because he never confirms who he was talking to.
It's so good. So yeah, the gang returns to the cabin to tell Abe about their meeting with Miss, but first Reed has to discipline Drown a bit.
Yeah, that naughty Drown, he... yeah, I mean, this is just, on the pile of just 1,000 moments in this chapter that make it really hard to sympathize with Reed as Drown gets his revenge later on. Because Drown is just... he's so clearly on the money. Like, he goes up to Reed and just brings up such a good point of just, hey, like, what are we doing? Like, big picture, we just run around chasing power for power's sake. And I love this detail he drops of, your dad has been talking about making this movie for ages, but nothing ever seems to happen there. And I love that detail because we heard about that movie in 7.x in the flashback to like 10 years ago, where Muscle was talking to Bristow and was like, "Oh yeah, I'd love to make a movie." And so it's just like, for 10 fucking years, Muscle has been, "Oh yeah, I'm totally going to make a movie."
It just feels so pathetic. Like, he's clearly gotten such power, but hasn't been able to do the thing he actually cares about because he's so focused on the hustle. Like, it just feels so sad. It's really sad.
Yeah, it makes you think about, like, executives in companies where, like, work has to become their whole life, and they put essentially their life on hold for the company. Like that just, it feels like the obvious comparison to make to Abraham. Like, he's doing all these horrible things, but he, in his own way that I'm not really sympathetic to him for, because he's keeping himself there, he's trapped in this position where he needs to be working 20 hours a day or whatever, and only thinking about work, otherwise it will all go away. Like the thing about being the executives in some of these big companies is if you're not working 24/7, you won't be able to keep up and you'll lose the job. So you get trapped in a way. And the fact that Abe has had one hobby project that he's talked about for 10 years and hasn't even fucking started it is a great representation of that. And Drown gets chastised for basically saying, "Hey, are we going to ever use all this power to, like, be happy?"
Which is a fair point.
Yep. Yeah, again, just like the scale, this chapter's just does so much to, like, tip the scales so that you root for Drown and hate Reed.
Yeah. So yeah, the group heads out to battle the witch hunters, and Reed flashes back to how he stole Drown.
And fuck this segment in particular.
It's like, rough, isn't it? It's
the whole
really
chapter's
rough.
hard to read in its own way, but this segment in particular just made me angry. And I had to push. I hated reading this. And the poor girl, like, she. Oh yeah, fuck this.
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
Yeah, I think we knew that, like, stealing the implements and familiars from people, like, wouldn't be happy fun time. Like, I never expected if like the Musa experience would be good, but especially in this case with familiars, like, they do this sort of reverse prisoner's dilemma on them and, like, torture them both with the threat of killing the other one. It's just blatant villain shit.
Yep.
And Reed thinks on it. He's like, "Oh yeah, that was pretty bad."
Yeah. Doesn't comprehend, like, it's incredible how little awareness he has.
Oh, no, there's the bit where he gets mad at her for making this difficult. And I was like, fuck you. Like, how dare she make you stealing the one good thing in her life difficult for you? Like, how selfish. Yeah, like, and yeah, and the fact that she's like the descendant of Drown's like first love as well was really just an unnecessarily heartbreaking detail from Wildbow.
Yeah, pretty rough. The lens I thought was interesting to examine this section is the lens of like narrative. Like the world of the other verse is a world of stories, and the musses. The thing that this made me realize is the musses go into and ruin existing stories. Like, okay, think of the story from Drown or this homeless girl's perspective, right? She is a, you know, a down on their luck girl who forms a bond with a monster that knew her ancestor and therefore wants to protect her, right? Like, that's a powerful story. That's a story that feels like she and Drown could be the protagonist of a series of novels, right? Of course they could.
Yeah,
It,
that's a young adult like novel
yeah,
series waiting to
like
be written. Like,
it's so compelling, and Reed as the musser steps into it and just ruins it. Like it feels like he's stepping into a fairy tale and preventing it from blossoming. You know what I mean? Um,
yeah,
and the fact that the Otherverse is a world of stories and narrative to me just makes it so interesting to think about. Like the mussers ruin stories. That's what they do, and I just think that's such a fascinating lens.
well, it's like they don't. I wouldn't use the word ruin. They like because the whole thing that this chapter really sets up is what the musses do is they elevate themselves a little
Yeah,
bit by
yeah.
taking from others, and so he's not ruining the story.
They
He's
pervert
stealing it.
them. They bastardize them. Yeah.
Yeah, he, yeah, he sees a story, sees a useful familiar, and just like takes it over, inserts himself into it, and that's really the recurring theme of this family. Is just they take and it elevates them a little bit, hurts other people a lot, but that is
Mm.
an acceptable trade off to them because they just do it over and over again to accumulate power.
Yeah.
And like the extra detail we sort of learn in this is like the reason we knew that they sort of stole these things was because Toadswallow introduced that idea, and he said they probably do it in duels or something. And it turns out he wasn't quite right. I'm sure they often duel the people to start with, but essentially the foundation of their secret ability is that you can share things like domains, implements, familiars with those who are close to you, and they abuse that. They basically force you to permanently donate all those abilities to them. And what I love about this is like we've had this idea seeded in the story because we've seen like Avery share Snowdrop's abilities with Verona.
Yeah.
I think we've seen Lucy give her power of healing to other Kenneteers once or twice too. Like
Yeah.
one of the coolest things we've seen in the practice is the Kenneteers get something and have the ability to share it with each other, and the Musses don't do that. As they don't share, they take, and it's just like yet again they take a cool thing about the practice, the ability to share cool powers, and they pervert it and make it so that they own it, and you don't get it at all anymore, and it's just the worst.
Mm. Yes. Yeah. It's rough. This is a rough segment for sure. But we cut back to the fight. Reed, his familiars, and Raquel are fighting Francis, Elise, and Harris.
Yeah, and I can't help but notice that you didn't mention Abe there,
Well,
because
he's
he's
barely
just
in it. He steps in every so often.
yeah, like that's the thing. He's basically acting as the equivalent of like a sniper. Like he sort of pops in through one of his doors, stabs someone, and then leaves again. And that just like he's clearly the one with the most power. Like this is such leading from the back bullshit. Like he's letting Reed and like Raquel of all people. Raquel's
Mm.
fucking going against Elise with a chainsaw so that Abraham can run around the back and snipe people. Like, doesn't he have like 6 familiars who could be doing that? I mean, not that I want to advocate for him using his slaves in combat, but like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, he's got all this power and he's still letting like the people beneath him do all the grunt work and like taking the easy way out for himself.
Well, I mean, his whole thing is exploiting the efforts of others, right? So
Yeah.
why not keep it going?
But this isn't a family where they get strength by cutting each other down, Ruben. Like, honestly, I think you could forswear the next muscle who says that because it's such queer bullshit.
Mm. Yeah. So yeah, I do love this fight. I mean, Y is here as well. Y is like texting Reed throughout it, which is
Yeah.
very fun. Reed sometimes doesn't even read the texts, but just kind of instinctively responds to them, which I thought was delightful.
Yeah, I really like the way it's like if he talks about it at one point. It's like if he's moving and he suddenly gets a text from Y, the assumption is he should stop because Y is texting him. Which I really like. It reminded me like they felt like a much more practiced version of it, like this is exactly how Nicolette has operated with the Kenneteers. Um,
Mm,
it almost makes me want to see Nicolette versus Y playing chess with the Kenneteers versus the Musses. Like, as I want to, as much as I want to see Y start to break good, I do also kind of want to see him go up against Nicolette in this like battle of the augurs guiding their chess pieces.
mm,
Also, it
yeah,
makes me realize that augury is the way to go because if I had to pick a role in these battles, you want to be Nicolette or Y, like safest role to have.
yeah. Um, I mean, it's being the ally that is appreciated, but not being directly in the line of fire, which is a nice one.
Yeah, yeah, you want to be the mastermind who's out of the action.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you said, this is also just like as much as I hate Reed and everything, this fight fucking rules. Like all of his implements, it's very cool watching him use them and combo them, like throwing implement knives and then when Elise catches them, like blowing them up with another implement. Like he's gross and terrible, but it's fucking cool.
Mm, yeah.
And same for his familiars. Like Blackhorn just takes a shot from that like BFG gun and kind of shakes it off.
Yeah. The thing that I liked is Blackhorn just kind of charges Elisa's chainsaw to fuck it up and get it out of action. I
Oh
thought that was a
yeah,
fun moment.
yeah. He like clogs her chainsaw with his bones.
Mm, yeah. Um, I do also want to call out this bit where Abe just straight up murders Harris, like seems to fully just kill him. And
Yeah, it's not like hard confirmed, but it seems pretty certain Harris is dead.
yeah, he bleeds pretty profusely and then collapses, right? So seems like Harris is dead. And we find out that 3 witch hunters have died in this fight. Presumably Harris is one of them. It's again not really super confirmed. But it makes me think just like there's no way that this is going to end in a peaceful resolution anymore, right? I don't see a way that the Kenneteers can talk down the witch hunters. I just don't think it's possible.
Oh, I mean, fucking at best, it feels like a stretch, but at best they can maybe aim for we're the good
Unify
witches,
to
they're the
kill
bad ones.
Abraham, yeah.
Yeah, like
Maybe.
um, yeah, but that's going to be a really hard case to make with the witch hunters like this. Yeah, that like I thought what was really interesting as well is that the main 2 witch hunters causing them problems in this fight is like Reed is being taken up by Francis and Harris is like the one, setting up things like the BFG. Like those were the 2 that Miss offered to take out of the equation for
Mm,
Raquel. In a way, like Reed's having it rubbed in his face a little bit that he didn't take that deal because, like Francis is the one causing him all this trouble, and that could have not been a thing if he'd gone with what Miss said.
yeah. Oh well. Um, so yeah, the fight continues. The Musses are almost getting the upper hand before before Rook shows up, starts to even out the scales, trapping Blackhorn and taking Blackhorn out of the fight.
And yeah, we got to shout out possibly the best zinger in the entire fucking story so far, which is
So
when
good.
Reed tells Rook to let Blackhorn go, and she just responds, "You first."
It's so good. It's maybe the best line in the entire story. It's just so fucking perfect.
Like, yeah, I don't know that there's anywhere else in the story where 2 words have said so fucking much, but it just captures everything about all of this chapter just in 2 words.
Yeah.
Um, it,
Perfect.
yeah, again, uh, not to repeat myself from the episode everyone's going to be listening to a few days after this one, but I find it really interesting to consider whether Rook could ethically alter someone like Blackhorn if she captures him like this.
Mm,
Like we saw her do that to a boogeyman. Oh no, I think Liz told us about her doing it to a boogeyman back in Arc 9. But like if Rook had the power to somehow change Blackhorn so that maybe it would weaken the familiar bond or, make him less of a threat, should she do that?
mm. Good question. I don't know. Yes. I don't know. What is the point of rehabilitative justice if not to change somebody to be more in line with the contemporary morals, right?
Yeah, but where do you draw the line on consent on that is the
Mm.
question. Like,
Well, I guess what if Blackhorn says yes, change me to do it,
oh yeah, no, exactly. If he says yes, then I'm all for it. Like, if consent is given, like Rook can go fucking nuts as far as I'm
right?
concerned.
Okay,
But
but then the
like,
next step is,
well, arguably,
rehabilitative prison
he,
systems aren't with consent, right?
no, exactly. But there's a difference between a rehabilitative like prison system where you engage with it versus like surgery. Like I would liken this more to like if somebody has some sort of mental illness or something that you could fix with
Mm,
surgery,
yeah,
and
yeah.
the courts decide for them that they need that surgery to fit into society. Like, I'm a lot more uncomfortable with that idea of Rook chopping him up, even if he's arguably brainwashed. Like, the familiar bond might prevent him from giving his consent to be
Yes.
changed, but you don't know. Like in Blackhorn's case, I actually get the impression he may not want it either way. But like with someone like Drown, if Drown wasn't allowed to ask for it, but we know he probably would want it, you start to get into real grey territory there
Mm.
with yes, like I'd equate it to surgery without consent, but consent maybe can't be given. Like that's yeah, the potential there for doing bad stuff is very real.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting one. It's an interesting one. I don't think the lines are very clear.
No.
So yeah, Reed starts to get his feet back under him before Montague takes over the barrier. Reed's practice is weakened and fails to take into account the danger from all around him. Drown starts to take his revenge.
Yeah, which is a beautiful callback to when he was talking about those people in Paris, and he was like, "Yeah, they spellbound all these people, and then when their leader got killed, they stupidly didn't account for the people
It
they'd
is
brainwashed
good.
within their ranks." And then
Yeah.
this dude fucking is like, "Hey, Drown, come with me," and Drown's like, "Get fucked," and I'm just like, "Oh, Reed, you fucking idiot."
Yep.
Um,
Beautiful. Beautiful symmetry. Ah, well played, Wildbow.
as well. Just before we sort of get into the rest of it, we've got to call out. Is this like Monty taking over the barrier in a more intense way than before, or is this like I think we've had it said before that the effect of Monty is less severe on like those who belong in Kennet, like the the Kenneteers don't get affected
Mm,
as much by some of his stuff on the barrier because they are Kennet's practitioners. Because, like, from Reed's perspective, this is so much worse than what the Kenneteers have described when Monty takes over.
mm,
Like, he's
mm.
being assaulted via all his senses and everything. And I'm like, how much of that is Monty's doing more? How much is it that because Reed is considered an invader? Like, it's a super intense version of the effect.
Yeah, it seems pretty rough on Reed. I don't know about. I feel like I've heard about the he doesn't belong here, so it's worse kind of thing, but I can't kind of place it in my mind at the moment. But yeah, it's pretty rough on Reed, which is cathartic on one hand and very brutal on the other hand.
Yeah, I mean, Monty's effect is nowhere near as harsh as Drown is because yeah, like this is the moment where I feel like the chapter was really challenging me because it almost feels like the entire chapter up until this point has been basically making you want this moment of Drown getting revenge,
Mm,
and I feel like I've spent the last like few years of my life trying to unlearn eye for an eye style justice.
mm,
So I'm like trying to academically get myself to not celebrate what Drown is doing here, but there's definitely a part of me that was like, fucking get him.
mm. Yeah. Um, I don't know. It's brutal, and like in my head, I know it's not good that this is happening to another human being, especially one who's like indoctrinated. But on the other hand, it does feel good for Drown to get this revenge.
Yeah,
So,
it's yeah, I agree. I like academically, I don't condone it, but like, fuck, it's hard not to. It's hard to sympathize for Reed.
mm,
Especially like Drown definitely got some points for me because his first priority, the first thing he does is he gets Reed to essentially revoke his claim to all the shit he'd stolen. I really like that as a bit of a noble first move of not just giving up Drown, but he makes him give up all the other implements, like his whole collection that he's stolen. The Drown's first priority is removing that, which I think deserves respect for being the top priority. But then once that is done, Drown definitely switches into revenge mode. And I think what's really interesting is there's definitely, again, a parallel to Drown's backstory, because what he does is ruin Reed's face,
Mm.
which is what the bad guys in his story did to him.
Yep.
So there's definitely a part of me that's like, oh, perpetuating bad cycles, not great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, I do though like the comparison of like Drown's whole thing is that essentially his face was disfigured, but the woman who loved him didn't leave him and stayed with him despite
Mm.
that.
Mm.
And that was like one of the really cool, heartwarming parts of his story. And what's great is Reed has this happen to him, but Reed doesn't have that woman who loves him and will heal his face. The closest he has is Raquel, which is just, in a way, exactly what this fucker deserves. But it's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. Which is what makes it so wonderful when Reed wakes up that Raquel is the one who's there.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's a great inversion on Drown's story that he wakes up and the person who can heal his face and really the only woman in his life just betrays him because it's what he like, it's what he's deserved. He deserves based on what he's done to her.
Yeah.
I think like I you also have to really respect how noble what Drown's doing here, because like essentially the witch hunters gather around and watch slash egg on the monster killing the human, which is not their MO. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, you know that the muscles are fucked when like someone like Clint will happily stand here and watch a monster hurt Reed.
Yeah. He's pretty far gone. I mean, I don't know. I guess the witch hunters probably have some innate sense of who's a villain and who's not.
Yeah, I guess like, you know, we learn in the witch hunters chapter that there are a handful of them who are pretty biased against others. I think like Elise and her mum weren't as much, some of them, but yeah, it's like I'm thinking of like Clint in particular seems very unsympathetic overall to others. So the fact that he's sort of willing to stand here and watch this was just like, oh man, they must have really clocked on to how shit the muscles are.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess we don't know. We like, you know, of course, Reed doesn't bring up at all what happened to Blackhorn or Drown. Like, there's every chance the witch hunters like killed Drown as soon as he was done. I'd like to think he and Blackhorn are in the wind, but we don't know.
Yeah, we don't. Maybe they will show up at some pivotal moment to save the day. We'll have to see, I suppose.
I would love for Drown to end up a Kenneth Other. I think he's actually a
Oh,
great
yeah,
candidate.
he's a good candidate for it, isn't he? Huh. That's an interesting thought. I would love to see that too now.
Yeah. Blackhorn, less so. Blackhorn seems not the worst, but not the best. Although he's a good tank.
Yeah. Hard to get a solid picture on him, though,
He
when he's
didn't seem
under
to
Reed's
hate.
thumb.
Sorry, yeah, he didn't seem to hate his position with the muscles.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? He seemed kind of fine being Reed's muscle. I don't know. I didn't have the best read on him.
Yeah.
Like the fact that the vibe he gave Reed when he refused to help him at the end here was just kind of indifference rather than hatred. Is very like, oh, okay, so like your priorities are definitely very different to mine.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So yeah, Reed wakes up in hospital. Raquel catches him up. He realizes that he's out of the family and that Raquel did nothing to help.
The moment where he's just like, Raquel, did you run? And she's like, oh man, the bandages. He's like, Raquel, did you run? She's like, oh, the bandages.
Yeah, it's pretty funny, isn't it?
It's so good. Like, yeah, again, I can't help but just be like, yeah, like, good on you, Raquel. Fuck this guy. I also really love like there's a writing thing Wabo does here where Reed's drifting in and out of consciousness and he keeps thinking in, out, and it's clearly setting up this thing where like Reed realizes at the end of it he's out of the family, and it sort of coincides with him falling out of consciousness as he realizes he's out. It's really well done.
Yeah, God, what a good motif it is. It's just another classic moment of Wabo being an excellent author, and you're just like, shit, this is great.
And yeah, I love Raquel twisting his words on him as well. I think like the last line of dialogue in the chapter right at the end is Raquel being like, oh, you know, we're in a family together now, you know, we won't cut each other down, which is basically her way of telling him he's out. And it's just she's vicious. it scares me and delights me in this moment.
Yeah, it's a worrying omen for Raquel's eventual reformation, isn't it?
Yeah, like Raquel is terrifying. Like obviously in this chapter, she's almost the sympathetic one. Like you, relative to the others in this group, you root for her. But like, I mean, when we do see her, she is very into the idea of becoming a muscle, and she is ruthless. Like if she's going to take this as an opportunity to try and step up as Abe's number two, and he's going to at least pretend to allow that, she could get very scary.
Yeah, yeah. I I don't know what to expect. I guess we'll have to wait and see, huh?
Yeah, and I think we'll be waiting a while because 13.1 gives me the impression that it's going to be at least another few chapters before the Kenneteers
Yeah,
rejoin the
yeah,
fight. So,
yeah. We're going to be spending a few chapters away from the musses. You know, at least two more theoretically, if the format is to be expected from how
yeah,
13.1 goes. But
which
having said
you never
that,
know with
yes.
Larbo.
Having said that, though, you know, Reed's out of the picture. There aren't that many more musses. I expect when we get back to Abe and the witch hunters, it's going to be showdown time.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing. Like the Ken and others have sort of talked about trying to keep the Kenneteers out of it, and I'm almost drawing connections to when they did Lucy's implement ritual at the BHI. Like the Kenneteers have used the fact that everyone else is fighting to they're going and taking this siesta to learn some stuff about the Carmine Beast, and like they're still planning to have the dinner with Zed and Bree, which I'm extremely hyped for. With Jasmine, but it's like I think they're going to like enter the world again after doing all this shit, and it's just going to be like you know, some Kennet others are probably going to be dead. The Musses will be somewhere. The Witch Hunters will be somewhere. Like we're taking this step away from the conflict for a bit to focus on what the Kenneteers are doing as everyone tries to leave them out. And when we step back in, I don't know what we're going to see, and I can't wait to find out.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Um, so we expect to see them again soon. But first, it's time to jump into Arc 13, Summer Break. 13.1, we're in Verona's head. And this chapter opens with Verona pondering on how hot it is, but then realizing she doesn't want to picture better weather because that's coming at the end of summer, which has its own can of problems. The Kenneteers, Jessica, Zed, and Bree all walk over to the house on Half Street.
Yeah, and that part you mentioned, like this chapter opening with Verona, like dreading the end of summer, but also kind of pushing the thought away because she can't cope with it. I feel like we've hit that at least once in every Verona chapter for like an arc and a half now, but it hasn't like gone anywhere. Like this is just a beat that Wildbow's making sure he hits in every Verona chapter, but it's not like he's just letting it boil. It's in a pressure cooker, and I'm just waiting for it to explode a bit later because it's just, he's not letting us forget it, but he's also not doing anything with it yet. And that's very worrying.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I I don't know. It's you're right. It is worrying. I don't know what it's like we can see all these pieces kind of crashing together and we know that it's going to be a disaster, but what can you do except watch?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I just like I don't think this will. I don't know that this will explode and change the whole story, perhaps, but there's definitely going to be a moment where Verona gets caught off guard by her emotions or something.
Mm,
It's happened before, and I'm worried that she's letting it happen again by. I mean, gosh, I don't know, because I think in her position, I wouldn't be able to face that thought either. I'd probably be doing the exact same thing,
mm,
which is why I'm sitting here yelling at Verona for doing it. That's basically my MO with her. But yeah, like it just feels like she's getting ready to make a mistake or fall apart at the wrong time again because she's letting this boil up.
yeah. I yeah, I expect we have a big kind of bottled up outburst from Verona coming up soon. Not outburst in the sense that she'll have a tantrum, but outburst in the sense that it's going to overflow, you know.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
I think something that's fun in this bit where they're walking over to the house on Half Street is how much this conversation focuses on, like, how much the Kennedys don't know, how much of the basics they don't know. So there's this first part where Jessica tells them that they've been kind of messing something up a bit with the shrines. And then there's this second bit with the nested dimensions that feels like it's a real oversight. And it's their knowledge is just so, like, lopsided, I suppose.
Yeah, and there's like all this stuff about how, because they're getting their education from others, like it's not as well rounded. It reminds me of having worked with people in the past who are like self-taught programmers, and when you do it that way, like you miss some foundational stuff that never comes up directly, but is like useful to have in the back of your head when you're programming. Like it's you get this sort of yeah, not well rounded education just by doing the things that you need. It's an interesting thing to be reminded of that like as powerful and knowledgeable as the Kenneteers are in some ways, they're missing some of the basics in this world. Like as we head into sort of understanding the Carmine Beast, it really like it's a good reminder to have that like we sometimes overlook some of the obvious stuff in this story.
Yeah. Um, yeah. It just is like, I mean, obviously, it's not a huge problem for us as the audience because I doubt Wabo would just have, Avery open a path and then turn inside out and break both her arms suddenly without us knowing that that was something that could happen. But it is still just kind of worrying.
Well, I think what's funny is that like we know that Monty exists. We heard how he was created. Like we kind of did know that this was a thing.
Mm,
It was just a lesson that wasn't quite explicitly spelled out. Like this is sort of what Zed says about the way they're learning from the others is like some of the others because this stuff comes naturally to them, they assume these are dots that people will just connect. Yeah, like Monty is like this advanced level topic on talking about this stuff and they're quite familiar with him, but we never connected those dots to opening multiple portals bad.
yeah, 100%.
Um, I also just want to call out. I do love the part when they get to the house and like Zed kind of talks about how epic the judges really are, and I always love these little reminders of like how like badass and incredible the story of the protagonist is because it's easy to lose sight of stuff like that. Like the only other time we've really heard of the judges really interacting with practitioners is like Ted, who went on a
Mm,
fucking 100,000 year journey,
yeah.
and it's like Zed just kind of reminds us meeting a judge is a huge thing for a practitioner. And it's just fucking insane that like day one the Kenneteers were brought before all of them and were like, "Sop." The fact that they've got the carcass of one sitting in their clubhouse, like it's just like it's easy to lose track of just the magnitude of what these three are dealing with. And
Yeah,
I love that the story takes a moment to have a character just remind us that this whole situation is just fucking insane.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. God, isn't it?
Like it feels like the equivalent of just like going over to your mate's place who's doing well in business and finding out he's got like the prime minister tied up in his basement.
Mm.
And it's like it's you met the prime minister and then also have them in your basement. What?
That's life. That's how it goes
Yeah.
sometimes.
Like it's basically Avery's take, and like Zed just has to laugh because it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean Zed doesn't know how to react, I think, to some of the things that they say here.
Yeah. I love like I am jumping ahead a bit, but like as he's like setting stuff up for them, I always love how Zed just channels that IT guy vibe energy of like whenever they want to do something that isn't just the normal way to do it and it requires a bit of extra work from him, he just seems a little frustrated with it.
Mm,
Like it always brings such a fun energy to like the Kenneteers being like, "Oh, we want to sort of see, how she went when she ruled." And he's like, "That's too vague. It's not really going to work." And they're like, "Oh, can we just like start with the important stuff and spiral out?" Like it feels very much like a project manager speaking to the programmers and just being like, "Oh, can't you just like make it work?"
mm.
And like Zed just channeling that programmer energy of like, "Oh, I mean, fucking fine, I can try." Uh, he just brings such a fun energy to all their interactions with them.
Yeah, 100%. He's a very fun character.
I also again I think we touched on this last week, but when Verona learns that opening two portals in the same space can get gnarly, her sort of response immediately is, "I don't suppose we can weaponize that."
Mm,
And Jessica kind of perks up and is like, you want to weaponize it?"
mm.
And it's just this continuing this thread that we've had since late arc 7 of like Jessica really not vibing with or trusting Verona. And yeah, it came up a bit last week, but it's much more overt in this one of yeah, like Jessica doesn't trust her, and I wonder where that is going to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's fair. I think Verona is not the best
Yeah.
at um moderation sometimes, I suppose.
Well, and I mean, we've talked about it since Arc 4, I want to say. Like, there are Alexandry aspects to Verona. Like, I think there is an argument that without Lucy and Avery and all the other good people in her life grounding her,
Mm,
like if Verona had been picked up at age 12 and deposited in the Bell and J family, I think she would have the potential to do very well there.
mm,
Um, there is a version of Verona that turned out very scary and bad, and I think sometimes little parts of that creep out in the way she thinks. And Jessica is someone who is very attuned to not liking that aspect of the practice, and so it jumps out to her more than anyone else, I think.
yeah. Uh, I think it's I think it's fine. Verona, it's fine for Verona to have some people around that question why she is going down some potentially dangerous paths.
Oh yeah, I actually think it's a good aspect of Verona. Like when it's you, like if she's brought up in this environment where she's using it for good, which she kind of is.
Yeah,
I think it's a
100%.
good thing. But yeah, I also find it hard to disagree with Jessica that it's a trait that you need to keep an eye on and be concerned about if you're someone who's gone through the shit Jessica's gone through.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, they get to the house on Half Street. The practitioners, all six of them here, consider the Carmine cube, and they plan what questions they're going to ask old CB.
Yeah.
Just a fun note, Verona. They're talking about, usually meeting the judges near the end of your story, and Lucy says, "Oh, well, we're about to meet the Carmine. Maybe that means we're 4/5 through our story." And Verona says, "I hope not, because that would mean a whole lot happens in the next 8 days," which I just think is Wabo, just being a bit of a scamp.
I really just thought, we were going to move through a couple of time skips. Not much was going to happen in this lead up. Yeah, no, you're right. This is this is just Wildbow kind of doing some dramatic irony. I think we know that the next 8 days are going to be fucking bonkers.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely. I think Pale at this point has crossed into 1.43 million words or something. At this point, I think it's probably going to eclipse Worm and Twig's word counts.
Their ward counts.
Their ward
Well,
counts.
Worm
Yeah.
has one ward, its sequel, and Twig has 0. So, yeah. So that means we need another 300,000 words or so, right?
To beat Worm, yeah, it's about 2 arcs essentially. It's basically assuming that there is an arc 14 or an epilogue that's long.
Yeah.
We'll probably beat Worm and
yeah.
take
That
another 2
would mean if Pale got to 1.7 million, that would mean right now we are 4/5 through it in word count. So maybe that's what Walbo's saying.
Yeah, and I mean just sort of looking at where we are now in 13.1, I'm like, there's no way that an average length arc could finish out this story. I don't think. I mean, I've been wrong about the pacing of Wildbow stories before, but
we'll see,
I just feel like there's so much to do in what would only be 12 more chapters.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about this. They kind of roughly agree on 3 groups of questions, and one Kenneteer will tackle each of them. Verona's going to start off with the Carmine's kind of original ascendancy to the throne. Lucy will cover when she met the local others and key moments there, which possibly means the Hungry Choir's creation. And then Avery is covering the actual night of the murder, which is interesting to me, especially because I would have expected Avery to cover the local others and Lucy to cover the actual murder night, because Lucy's very much been the primo detective, whereas Avery has been focused on relations to others a bit more.
Yeah, I guess when you're looking through it through that lens, that makes sense actually. Although I guess the way I sort of looked at it, Avery brings up her point of her being the arrivals and departures person, and so seeing the departure of the Carmine Beast from existence.
Yeah.
Makes sense. As for Lucy, I feel like where my gut says it'll probably go, which means with Wildbow I've got at best 25% of the picture, is Lucy is somebody who has struggled with these ideas of justice, punishment, and all that stuff. So her being the one who's going to see how the Carmine actually operated in the role, makes a lot of sense to me, because she's essentially going to be challenged by how the Carmine Beast dealt with power. Like when we've seen Lucy essentially have to do the quote unquote policing part of the practice, she's felt very uncomfortable with it because like for obvious reasons, she's sort of uncomfortable with the whole concept and doesn't really know how she wants that to happen. And so I think it'll be interesting for her to step in the shoes of somebody who has a lot of power and see how they tackled the concept of justice.
Mm, yeah.
I do though. I agree though that just from the perspective of solving the mystery, you would think like Lucy would have been the first one to volunteer for seeing the murder,
Yeah.
like at the start of the story.
I think it's interesting. I mean, we'll get into how Verona's one goes, but I trust Wabo has a reason for explicitly why each person is going to be covering a certain thing. So I look forward to seeing those.
Yeah, like yeah. My guesses at this point, I obviously just went over Lucy's, and I think Avery's will probably touch on all this guilt she's carrying from the fact that she's about to leave.
Mm,
And also just like you get the vibe in Verona's already that the Carmine Beast was lonely as fuck, and I'm sure that'll come up in Avery's journey. Wouldn't be an Avery journey without at least touching on that. There's also Avery. Avery mentions basically having a secret motive to specifically wanting to see the end,
mm,
and I don't know what that is. There's been some theories. I think Belegtal and Snowdrop's Tiny Fan were talking about some theories on our Discord. I yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is. It feels like a good setup for Avery's journey in a couple of chapters.
yeah, for sure. Um, I mean, I might as well jump to this now. Avery's concerns about her leaving tie interestingly into a possible theory that the Carmine Beast didn't fight back against her murder because she was just kind of ready to give up the role. So
Yeah,
possibly that's the connection there is Avery is going to
yeah,
experience the Carmine Beast murder as a willingness to kind of let go of her connections to the area.
yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking. Like this feeling of like potentially the Carmine Beast was surrounded by guilt at kind of abandoning the role, which
Mm,
would tie into Avery's guilt around leaving her friends, which is what stopped her telling them so far.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
that would be my gut instinct for where it can go. But as I said,
And
it's Wildbow, so that'll only be part of the picture.
yeah. Anyway, we'll have to see, I suppose, because we only see Verona's one.
Well, sorry, I do want to call out the other thing in this discussion about who should do what is Lucy makes this sort of comment about how I don't want Verona doing the middle one because she might get lost in tangents. And Verona very healthily sort of speaks up and says, I don't like how we talk about me in terms of my weaknesses. And she comments that it's a bit of a running thing. And I really like this moment because I think Verona and us all kind of academically know that Lucy and Avery think she's a genius at this stuff. Like,
mm,
I don't think they genuinely think she's useless, but we know that that's an insecurity Verona has been carrying for quite a while now. And I can very much understand and relate to this idea of like, since that is something she's carrying, she's noticing lines like that a lot more
mm.
because she's kind of projecting that insecurity onto everything they're saying. And yeah, I guess the first step to trying to address that is bringing up comments like this. So it's a good moment to see her sort of mentioning this, and I hope it can get to the point where she can sort of confront them about the fact that this is actually something she's insecure about, and they can just tell her that she's been an idiot because she's actually pretty good at this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Verona's insecurities are definitely front and center in this chapter.
Yes, leads right into her journey with the Carmine Beast.
It does indeed. So yeah, Verona prepares and goes in and becomes the Carmine Beast back when she was just the Beast.
But she doesn't completely become the Carmine Beast. She also becomes a bit of a hybrid, and she dives into some of her
Yes.
own memories as well.
Yeah, I mean, God, this is fucking incredible, right? Like, obviously, we'll talk about it more in depth as we go, but Verona's life mirroring the Carmine Beast and the way that Verona's life is kind of fitted in, kind of bluntly, into the Carmine Beast's train of thought at the time is just so powerful and wonderful. Like, it's just so incredible of a way to tell this. It like as I was reading it, I was fucking falling in love with it so quickly. Like, it's incredible.
Yeah, because I think part of me knew coming into it that, like, this is Wildbow. It'd be too simple for him to just have it be flashback memories. Like,
Yeah.
he doesn't let himself off that easily anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I love about this particular setup is that, like, from a narrative perspective, like, good storytelling here is to tell us the Carmine Beast's backstory and tie it into Verona's like character arc. Like, that is what any good story is going to do with this, is like give us the part of the Carmine Beast thing that we should also take a lesson in Verona's arc on. And so, because that is the case, what the Otherverse does, what Wildbow does with the Otherverse, is just make that connection very literal, like, just so you can't miss it. The story itself is like, hey, we're just going to tie the Carmine shit and Verona's shit together, like, not in subtext, very literally, to the point where even Verona in the story is like, oh, this is talking to me as much as it's telling me that can't. Like, it's so good. Like, this is what I
Yeah.
love about the Otherverse, is it takes what you should be doing with the subtext narratively and just turning it into text.
Yeah. God, this is one of the best examples of it, though. Like,
Yeah.
it's just incredible.
Like, again, I think we mentioned this a bunch back in Arc 12, but this is one of those things where I'm like, look at this, and I'm like, this has to have been in Wildbow's plan for the story when it was like
Yeah.
a 4 arc story.
Yeah,
Like,
it's just too perfect, isn't it?
yeah. And like, I'm beginning to say that so often that it's like there's going to be more than 3 arcs of me saying that, so it clearly can't all be true. But like, yeah, just the idea that the Carmine story in each of these snippets is going to tie so perfectly into the journey of each of these characters, and that he's pulled that out of subtext and made it text. It's just, it's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. It just, yeah, it really is. So yeah, the beast hunts, but her hunting starts to fall behind as society advances so quickly. And Verona is doing well in class, but starts to falter and isn't able to keep up as her parents' relationship simultaneously falls apart.
It's so good.
It's so fucking good. Oh my god. It's so like, it's just the right level of disorienting where you kind of feel like you're only just keeping up with Verona's train of thought as she's experiencing these two simultaneous lives. It's just like, it's so perfect. We shouldn't just keep going on about it like that, but it really just is such an incredible chapter. And I'm so excited that we're going to get 2 more of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm eagerly anticipating these other 2 journeys.
Yeah.
What I really loved about this is, and maybe it's because, like, I think those who followed my live read know that, like, I was reading this chapter at 2 a.m. and was struggling a bit, and it took me a couple of these switcheroos to be like fully confident in what was happening, that we were tying her memories to the Carmine's journey. And I really loved that moment where you're not sure and you're like, I guess, being taken on Wildbow's wild ride of like, wait, we were the Carmine and now we're in Verona's memories, and like, what are we doing here? And then, like, as I got to about 3 of them, you're sort of like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. That's fucking cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, like, I guess, just to maybe jump ahead a little bit, but like, what we sort of really start to learn here is, again, the Carmine Beast, or before she was just the Beast, feels just like another candidate for a Kennet other in a way, like,
Yeah.
an other who the system was rewarding at one point and then started to fail, and she was left with no options but to fail within the system.
Yeah. The thing that this raised for me was thoughts about whether there was a path for Verona to become the Carmine Cat. Because I'd never really believed that it was possible before, but seeing how Verona's current feelings map onto the original Carmine's feelings, I can kind of feel it now. Like, I can see a world where Avery announces, or Marisica announces that Avery is leaving town, and the drama boils over. Verona bubbles up, and especially if things aren't going well with Lucy, they aren't able to talk her down from this, and it kind of just flips over into her thinking that this is the path that she could take. I don't know.
I think that might have been true early in the story. But I feel like the takeaway that you get from Verona seeing it in this chapter, and Verona's takeaway from seeing it in this chapter, is that this isn't what she wants. Because, like, basically, the whole concept of this vision is the Carmine Beast essentially telling her that by taking the role, it essentially did the equivalent of just giving up and going to uni, getting a shitty job in a shitty 1-bedroom apartment, getting pressured to get married by her parents. Like, it's the Carmine Beast almost is just yelling at her like, me taking this role was giving into the system and in the worst way. And so I almost feel like there's no way Verona would take it after seeing this. Earlier in the story, when she didn't have that info, like that's definitely possible. But like after this chapter, I think there's no way she would.
Okay, that's fair enough. I think. I don't know. We'll have to see. I can see that path still. I think. But yeah, the Carmine Beast takes her throne reluctantly from somebody who also doesn't want it anymore. Challenges come to stop her, and she just beats them all.
The detail and the realization that even the previous Carmine just was fucking done and retired is just mental and beautiful. Like you know, close to being on par with that reveal from last chapter that Solomon ended up forsworn. Like just the thrown in detail of yeah, she just got to go up and eat the previous Carmine because they were done. They didn't even want to fight. Like literally the embodiment of violence and fighting in the region was done fighting. It's oh, it's beautiful.
It feels pretty important to me, right? Like the Carmine Beast even from day one is pretty reluctant to take this role. Obviously, the previous Carmine was also reluctant to have their role. All the other judges seem pretty sad to be where they are. Like maybe being a judge just fucking sucks. Maybe the Carmine Beast didn't fight back against their murder because they're done. They're over it.
Yeah, and I mean, like something I never really considered until this chapter, and I can't believe that I hadn't was like becoming a judge, like we see the Carmine Beast do here, kind of tears you away as an other from like who and what you are. And I think we've considered this in the context of John. Like, John becoming the Carmine would pull him away from the little things that he likes in life, like getting to sing his songs and, play Pokemon. And I guess I just hadn't really considered that applied to everyone. Like the Carmine Beast, her story is essentially she was born as this beast and she had a role, and then that role started to disappear as humans advanced, and she was being left alone. And then basically, as all the forks in the river closed off, one opened, which was basically, hey, come take this Carmine role, and then you'll get life and you'll get power and you'll be fine. And yeah, I mean, she got it, but I think we're going to see in Lucy's journey next. I don't think this role really had anything to do with what she was as the beast. So it's not really going to bring her any satisfaction. Like, I guess maybe I assumed that when you ascended into the judge's role, your nature changed a little bit to adapt to the role. But now I'm thinking maybe it's just like, these are a bunch of others who weren't really designed to do or born to do this. And they're getting stuck in these roles that are artificially created by the seal. And now they're up the top, they're alone, they're not really doing what they want to be doing. They're stuck in this job and they're just alone and miserable.
It's a pretty sad existence, seemingly.
Yeah, like your only peers are the other judges who you're not really going to have anything in common with, really. Like they're all very different domains, very different people. Yeah, like it's. I get. Yeah, I guess like thinking on it, and we'll get more info on this, like as we see the Carmine her reign in practice. But I'm just getting the vibe that it's like their nature as others isn't that fundamentally changed, and they're all basically being ripped out of the jobs they're meant to do and put in these roles that they're not really designed to do, compared to say like a god, like presumably a god becoming the Carmine would fit in relatively easily, because as a god they're sort of they're by their nature presumably willing to shape existence. But the seal is set up that just some random dog thing that kills people in the dark should be elevated to that role.
Yeah. While we're talking about the judges, it's worth noting as well that we see the doe here, and like this is the same. Like the other two judges are different to the ones that we know and love, whereas the doe is the same, the one that has lasted. And I guess we kind of knew this already, didn't we? But it just feels interesting to really see it after we've gotten to know the judges a bit more. Like it just feels odd, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, because you're right. Like we already knew that the doe was the only one who predated the Carmine, but you're right. What seeing them here made me realize is they're also the only one we haven't really hung out with in the recent arcs. Like we got the Sable in, we got the Aurum in, and then there was talk of getting the doe in to help with Charles, but we palmed him off on Ray instead.
Mm.
So it's interesting that the judge who's been around the longest is yeah, the one that we're not seeing. I think we've seen the doe like at most when Avery visited it in 4.1. Um,
Mm.
I don't really remember what happened in that, but yeah, it yeah, I don't know. It does feel a little bit suspicious in a way.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean,
I
I
don't
guess
know.
there's a read that the doe may have the least miserable of the roles because the one thing I do remember about their domain in 4.1 was that they had all those innocents they were rescuing as sort of like people to hang out with.
Mm.
Which I guess maybe that helps. Like, it'd probably be the best job because you're dealing with like innocence, so you're dealing with like presumably the more pleasant side of the job, and then also the doe is running a domain where they get to like keep people safe and help people, and that would presume I guess just make them, for want of a better term, a little bit less suicidal than the other roles.
Mm.
Whereas, like, I can see the Aurum just kind of getting left behind. Like, I think we see a mouse in this one, and I can see that as society moves on, perhaps the Aurum can occasionally get left behind if they can't keep up.
Mm. Yeah. It's yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm still on the train that Carmine is going to play more of an active role, but the fact that we haven't seen the doe very actively, I guess we did a while back. The doe was really the first judge we had a chance to talk to, but I don't know. I don't know.
I'm
Just
curious.
suspicious.
I'm curious to see the doe as well, just because I want to see what their version of justice looks like. Like, obviously, we saw the sable as that very like uncompromising, death-like form of justice, where the sable essentially issued commandments and everyone sort
Mm.
of had to follow. Whereas
Mm.
then with the Aurum, we saw they very much more acted like a judge in a courtroom drama of like just responding to what was said and never offering an opinion really, just saying, "Oh,
Mm.
that is a good argument. I'll allow it," sort of
Mm.
deal. Like I wonder what the alabaster doe's form of justice, especially for someone like Charles, would have looked like. Like, does she? Is it a she? I can't remember what the gender of the alabaster doe is.
Mm.
But yeah, like, does the alabaster doe always like give people another chance, or yeah, I don't know. I'm so curious to see what a trial or an interrogation with the alabaster doe looks like.
I'm pretty sure we will get more doe, encountering before the end of the story.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess moving on from the miserable life of the judges, there's this great moment where we've essentially been tracking like three points of view for a little bit. We've got like the Carmine Beast, Verona, in this sort of distorted future where everything it's like late stage capitalism future. And then this like hybrid version that she's kind of been using to blend the two, the Carmine Cat.
Mm.
And there's just this moment where it all culminates for all three of them together, and the text just goes, "Even winning feels like losing," all three of them said in unison. The
Mhm.
Carmine Beast thoughts given voice, when it's by the rules of that world. And I just had to call out this line because it's just like that's the chapter. The whole chapter's message in like a nutshell is basically and well, this fits into Verona's character arc as we touched on as perfectly as it does to the Carmine's point of view. Like the Carmine basically tells us in this whole chapter, I was getting left behind. This was presented to me as a way to stay relevant and still have an impact, and I did
Mm.
it, and it was fucking shit. And it was like living your shittest future life that you can imagine. Don't be like me. And this is the thing that causes Verona to basically hop out and say, I don't think I want to be an other anymore. Which I've been waiting 13 arcs to hear those words. Um, but what I particularly love about that is she doesn't have an answer yet. Like this is very much Verona knows she doesn't want to be a classic human, but she's also realizing that taking this other path that the universe presents to her is going to lead to a different kind of misery. Like what the Carmine Beast and her said in unison. Even winning feels like losing when you do it by the rules of this world. Like
Mm.
uh, Verona now knows what she doesn't want to do, which is become another. And I can't wait to see where we're going to go with.
What she's gonna
Uh,
do instead?
yeah, she's going to have to forge her own path. I can't wait to see what that looks like. Because, and I mean, that's just that's been the end. That's had to have been the end game for Verona as well. Like all her stuff with not wanting to pick a specialty. Like we've talked about inventing her own form of practice and stuff. Like that's just yeah. It just feels like this perfect end game for her. Is she's going to have to carve out her own path, make her own fork, and I can't wait to see how she does that and what it looks like.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. We'll have to see, I guess. So yeah, Verona leaves the interrogation, inspection, whatever you want to call it, using only about half of her time, and recounts what she's learned to the rest of the group before they prepare for Lucy's turn. One of the main things that they've learned is that in this contest, the judges have a bit more of a thumb on the scale than we realized, which is interesting, but kind of seems to work in favor of the Kenneteers, confusingly, because John is the choice of the judges. So possibly something that will be in our favor, possibly not. We'll have to see.
Yes, assuming that we want John to take the role, which is probably arguable. Yeah, like the fact that the judges are theoretically on the side of the Kenneteers / John means that this is good news. Yeah. It is also interestingly possibly a variable Marisica may not have been able to consider. Because essentially the premise set up here is that these challenges all happen so far apart that there's not really anyone around to pay attention to the fact that the rules are inconsistent. And we know Marisica is fairly young, so there is just a chance that this is not something she's aware of. That feels optimistic, given
who she is.
Yeah, the way Fairy seemed to have a knack for putting complicated shit together, but there's a chance.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There's a chance. We'll see.
I also, again, I just want to call out this moment where Verona basically says, she's worried about not knowing what future she wants to take and like falling into a bad pattern and becoming like her dad. And Lucy responds, this is why I'll be there. Like, I'll smack you in the back of the head if I have to. I'm not going anywhere. And it's really heartwarming, and Verona smiles. And then the next line is just Avery being like, I'd better go make sure Snowdrop hasn't eaten all the snacks. And it's just like, as she says that, I was sort of like, oh shit, yeah, Avery's going to feel bad because she is going somewhere. She's leaving. And I'm just always amazed at Wildbow's ability to go from heartwarming to heartbreaking in, 0.2 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad. You're right. I read this and was like, oh, Avery, come on, just talk to them.
Yeah, please just do it, Avery. It's like, yeah, the fact that she just sort of awkwardly fades out of every conversation that turns into like, don't worry, we'll be here for each other, is just heartbreaking.
So yeah, I guess that's where these chapters end. We've got Lucy's interrogation. We have Verona's interrogation done. Next up, Lucy's and Avery's, presumably, which is going to be very fascinating. I am really looking forward to them.
Yeah, the sort of simple assumption is we'll get one chapter on each. But yeah, I can't wait. And we already sort of talked about like what we can maybe expect to be dealt with thematically in them, but I'm sure there'll be more to them than what I can possibly fathom. I can't wait. And then after that, we get the hype of the Kenneteers stepping back out with this new knowledge and seeing what happened when they were inside the house for most of a day.
Yeah.
It's gonna be that that community gif where Troy walks in with the pizza.
Yeah, exactly right. But yeah, so so before we wrap up, though, of course, we got to visit some pale predictions from the community left in our pale predictor form. Elliot, do you have a prediction that you want to pull out first?
Yes, I've pulled out a prediction from Sleeping Beluga. Beluga basically says that they think Ken was like Marisica's secret plan for Ken is to fuck up like Avery's practices and like specifically, maybe Zed's as well. Which I love this as essentially what Verona talked about this chapter. Basically, Sleeping Beluga is theorizing that Marisica has in fact weaponized this exact portal thing that Verona wondered if you can weaponize. With the idea being that Avery might unknowingly have opened something to a path or something within some city magic and done something very bad and ended up as a horror or something. Or at the very least, knowing that Ken is running around doing city magic will limit the ability of the Kenneteers to do something like open paths later on. Like if if Ken's being forced to do some city magic, Avery can't duck in and out of the ruins as easily or whatever. I really like this idea of closing the thought that 13.1 brings up, which is, raising that multiple portals can't exist at the same time. Why would Walbo bring that up? I think Sleeping Beluga might be on the money that Ken is a way to stop people from doing that sort of practice.
Interesting. I think this is a very interesting prediction. I like the idea that this is potentially a trap for the Kenneteers. The pieces are all there. I think it works. I wonder how it would feel. Like, would it feel satisfying? I guess now that we've introduced it in these chapters, it kind of makes sense, I suppose.
Yeah, I like learning that.
Especially if it fails, I guess. If it fails, it's especially fine.
Well, like that's the thing. I don't think it needs. I don't think the end result needs to be like, something explodes and we end up with one of these gnarly multiple things. But now, just with this knowledge that Avery has, it means that if we know Ken is in play actively doing city magic, Avery can no longer open those portals. So, like, even with this knowledge in our heads, it's still limiting Avery. And that's, to me, what makes it feel like that fairy plot that makes sense is, even though she knows about it and it's not going to blow her up anymore, it's still limiting her and it's going to affect what she can do. And that, that will be sort of satisfying either way. Like, she can't use some of her biggest tools in that situation.
Yeah. I do like it as a restriction. I think it could be very cool.
What have you got for us?
So I have a prediction from AJDL, whose prediction is that the wolf is the part of the Carmine Beast that was shed and hence lost when she became a judge. So I pulled this theory out because I think a lot of people, including myself, are looking for theories that kind of reconcile a few missing pieces around like the role of the wolf and who the Carmine Beast is / was and the Carmine Beast's role in the conspiracy, since these all feel like they're the unanswered questions remaining in the story. So I pulled this out because I thought this was a cool theory that tied that all together in a way that I hadn't heard before.
Yeah. I'm still writing the wolf fits into things because she's trying to meteorite the Forest Ribbon Trail into Kennet.
I've seen a few things around being found and how the wolf is like good at being found. I saw one, there was a prediction about how because finders choose to forget things that happen to them from the wolf has built up a collection of found objects that nobody can remember. I thought that was a very cool little one as well.
Yeah, I think I saw that one as well. Which would make like, if the wolf is perhaps collecting all of the boon companions, the snowdrops that get sacrificed, and using them to get a bit found. But I'm still rocking that theory that Avery is her anchor that she will use to bring herself into the world, and that will be just what Kennet needs on top of all this other bullshit.
Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for sending in your predictions. You can find the link in the show notes down below if you want to send your own predictions into us. And also, speaking of sending things into us, as a reminder, next week we'll be doing our mailbag stuff. So send us in questions that you would like us to answer. I guess the right place to leave them is in our discussion thread, which you can find again linked in the show notes down below. We will answer those next week.
Yes. We're also on Twitter at Pale Reflect Cast. The live reads are back on as of yesterday. I'm finally in a position to do those again. I think the one that's scheduled for tomorrow will probably have to be a day late, but in general, still they're back. So hopefully people are excited about that.
Yeah, it's definitely good to see them back. If you want more from Duff Media, you can go to duffmedia.com to find all the other great shows on the Duff Media Network. I think we've made reference to Pale in Comparison a number of times, and we will continue to reference it because it's a great show, and you can find it at duffmedia.com.
Yep, and they obviously teamed up with us for the Pale Complexions fan art contest. Which,
yes.
If you're listening to this part of the podcast, you've got desperately little time to go in there and get a vote in, but now's the time.
Now's your last chance. Yeah. And if you want to support the Duff Media Network, including Pale in Comparison, including us, including all the other great shows on the Duff Media Network, you can go to patreon.com/Duff Media. give us some support, and it'll help us keep doing things like this fan art contest, like the 24-hour live stream that we have planned, like all the other great stuff that we try to do for the community. That all is funded straight through the Patreon. So become a patron and support us.
Yes, and this story is also funded through a Patreon. Warbo's Patreon,
Hey!
patreon.com/Warbo. You give him money, he gives you stories. It's a pretty good trade.
It's a wonderful deal. So go and do it. And I guess we'll see you all next week for more interrogations of the Carmine Beast.
Well, we'll see people before that, right? Because there's also the reflecting episode.
Actually, yes, true. There's, because we recorded them out of order.
Yeah.
I got very confused, but yes.
Yeah, so I don't know, 3 or 4 days or so after this, we'll release that one too. So keep your eye out.
Bye, everyone.